Hello, and welcome to A Blueprint for Supply Chain Optimization, a special webcast focusing on network design and optimization. My name is Bob Troublecock. I'm the Editorial Director of Supply Chain Management Review, and I'll be your moderator for this event, which is being sponsored by our friends at JDA Software and NetSuite. Now, joining me today is Dale Pickett, Director, Supply Chain Consulting for Tompkins International. Dale has extensive experience leading clients through network design and optimization initiatives, and he's going to share that experience with us today. Now, if you haven't already done so, I'd like to remind you that attendees are invited to download a complimentary copy of A Blueprint for Supply Chain Optimization. This was a feature article that Dale authored for the September-October 2013 issue of SCMR. To download the article or this presentation, just click on the green resource icon at the bottom of your console. Finally, remember that this is an interactive event. You can feel free to submit questions as you listen to the webcast. If we don't get to all your questions before the end, we'll forward them to Dale later. So what is driving the need for network optimization? In a word, complexity. We have the growth of global markets, increasing customer expectations, rising costs, and more intensive and diverse competitive pressures. They're all driving the development of new supply chain strategies in intricate network designs. That increasing complexity is exactly why supply chain networks need to be frequently reevaluated, redesigned, and reoptimized. Over the next 30 to 40 minutes, Dale will lay out the steps that must be taken for a successful network design initiative that leads to a world-class supply chain network. And with that, I'll turn the microphone over to Dale. Dale, it's up to you.
Thanks, Bob. I appreciate the intro and look forward to spending a few minutes with you to talk about how to design a network supply chain and go through the process of attempting to optimize it for all clients. What we'd like to do is I'm going to talk briefly over the whole scope of this presentation, and I want to talk about how we're going to start out, how often we need to do network supply chains, and, well, the optimization. And there's planning associated with it, being either strategic, tactical, operational, and contingency planning. I want to talk a little bit about the scope, some key components, how we get started, what we're really looking at as far as starting out with what we do. And when I say what we do, it's the client, what we do. What is our business? We take a tool, we model what our status quo is, we develop some alternatives, we talk about some operating costs, we perform a little bit of an economic analysis, and we make a recommendation. And so getting into it, you say, well, what are we going to do with the network optimization, and why would we do this? Well, why we want to do it is key from an executive standpoint. And we really want to incorporate strategy. If we don't understand the overall strategy of the business, we're going down a path that's going to yield poor results. The executive team has to understand that we need direction. And from that, we either need to talk about whether it's going to be minimizing capital, looking at operating margins, the customer experience, and the customer experience is huge right now. And the ramifications of incorporating that into an analysis, saying, do I want to be able to reach and order it within a day, 2 days, 3 days, 4 days, or 5? And whatever I'm currently at, how do I want to increase that with today's customer? And when I say today's customer, if you look at it, in the past, we've looked at network design and talked about logistics cost optimization. We're not so certain that that's really the right view of it now. We think it should be more along the lines of profit and value maximization. And that when you look at just cost in itself, it's not yielding the bottom line results that everybody needs to get to. The last component, when we're really starting to get started, is what are the sensitivities we're going to apply to this? There's numerous ones that should be taken into account because cost is not the only objective here. We have to be flexible in going forward. This is not a project. It is a process. And too many people get wrapped up around, okay, we've got this network optimization project. It is not a project. It is a process. We have to continue to evolve. This is where the flexibility and evolution of the company comes into play. The market will change from today to tomorrow, to the next 6 months, to the next year. It will continue to change. We have to be capable of keeping up with it. So what's the next step? Well, one of the things is we like to believe in strategy, structure, and implementation. And so the key is here is once we figure out our strategy, let's understand the structure to get us there, and then let's start implementing. Seems pretty simple. However, it gets a little complex. So what do we want to talk about with strategy? We've got to understand the capabilities that we currently have within our organization and how those relate to our business goals and where we want to go to in the future. And when you look at it, you say, well, what capabilities are you talking about, Dale? Well, we want to look at our network. We want to look at the cost associated with getting and moving products. We want to look at the distribution centers and the fulfillment centers and what their capacities are as far as getting orders out. If we have bottlenecks in our business processes, we need to understand that. Technology makes leaps and bounds every 2 to 3 years. Are we capable of keeping up with our e-commerce? Are we capable of keeping up with the mobile technology? Are we capable of keeping up with our competition? As an organization, we generally have to look at it because there are going to be changes. And can we keep up with the change that we want to be at? So it requires something for us to look at. We need a roadmap, some way to get to where we want to go. And we have to understand that if you don't have a little bit of a roadmap with executive leadership and guidance behind it, we will end up in a detour situation. So what we want to do is look at some of the major components here. And what we believe in designing an ideal network is that there's multiple layers that we need to look at. And we really have to effectively integrate people, the organization, the business processes, and technologies for it. What we want to do is we want to look at the business operations and make sure all of these strategies within the different components are aligned correctly. We want to make sure the organizations are right and that they understand that we are moving forward and we're going to change. And are they capable? If they're not capable, we want to move to the right. We want to move forward. The next, we want to look at our technology. We have to take that into account. The last component is that we have to understand with new processes, if not managed effectively, it's not going to work. It's going to fail. When you look at omnichannel and the agility, flexibility, and speed that really omnichannel brings into play in the marketplace, we have to be nimble, we have to be quick, we have to be flexible. So, but not at all, is the inventory and sales. We have to measure where our inventory is at. We have to be able to manage that and where our sales are going to project, and using the models. And the model's a tool. And so that's what we want, is we want the tool to help us in going forward. On this slide, you'll see that there's a couple of graphs here. And I say conventional approach, and I'm using the term Tompkins approach. And it could be a different heading, but I used it for here being the approach for the future that we see everybody needs to have to move forward. In traditional manner, what we looked at was the number of DCs and network cost and lead time. And if you look on this graph, you see as the number of DCs goes up, that your cost is definitely going to go up. What you also want to understand is that the combination of network cost and lead time, those combined increase as well. So that's the conventional approach saying, and it's you're looking at your algorithms and you're trying to optimize based upon that. Well, is that really where we want to be? So for the future, for I guess the current marketplace, you look at it and it's about speed. And not only is it speed, it's how are we going to leverage all of the facilities. What we want to do is we want to look at our current models of distribution centers and fulfillment centers, and that's what I'm identifying in the bottom left bullet that's black, is their current distribution center and fulfillment center model. Distribution center is getting it to the stores. Fulfillment center is effectively an e-commerce facility, getting it out to the customer. We have to increase the speed and the velocity of getting the product to the customer. That's how you obtain sales. The next thing we want to look at is how quickly are the customers going to move? How are they going to change their buying habits? We've got to be flexible in order to do that. So that's where you're moving to the right, and you're moving to an omnichannel supply chain where everybody's communicating and we're changing with the velocity that we need to. This is great. This is affecting the bottom line of the company, and the executive management needs to understand what we need to do to get there. So some of the next steps is, well, what is the frequency that you're talking about, Dale? Well, really, this is a process, and it never stops. It's not a project. What a model does is that it uses the predictable information we can put into it, and we take some unpredictable points, and we try to mimic that to where we can get the best overall answer of going forward. Strategic plans, and when you're looking at it, really is a policy-making event, and what we want to do is go forward. For tactical plans, we're looking at execution of the strategic plans. Operational plans is the day-by-day events, and from a distribution, fulfillment, manufacturing facility, what are we dealing with right now to get the tactical answer that we want to? How are we dealing with these tasks on a day-by-day basis, and how can we do that? Contingency planning is unknown events that are going to pop up, and do we have a plan that really comes into play to take care of some emergencies? So when I'm looking at this, I say, well, let's talk about a little bit about strategic planning, and how well is strategic planning a part of network optimization. It is critical. This is what we're doing with a network optimization. This is the strategy that your company is going to go forward with. We need to look at the stocking points or transportation, where things are moving, how they're moving, the inventory and how it's moving around. Inventory is critical because it's cash and cash. The cash and cash play, where what are we looking at to invest versus can we reduce inventory to use that money? So that cycle is really important, the IT structure. But what are we trying to address? We're trying to address how to optimize everything, and also can we handle the realignment of capacities. If the organization can't, then we've got to figure out how to get there and take that into account in the overall analysis. And you have to remember, and this is an interesting little point on the reliability and risk, is that a network modeling tool is a proactive tool designed to guard against predictable changes in requirements in which timing can be anticipated. In which timing can be anticipated is key. Today's environment says timing is very difficult to project past the next couple of months, much less 6 to a year from now. So we're going to use forecasting models and what we've done in the past and try to project for the future, but we've got to keep all of that into consideration for going forward. Next thing is this is a template for designing some initiatives. What I'm showing here is how you take into account what the initiatives are, addressing gaps or opportunities within an initiative itself. What you want to do is you want to track where you're at and the time frame, how often we do it, how quick can we execute. Then we want to look at each initiative that we're looking at, and then from it do some investment, benefit, and magnitude. From an executive position, this is where I'm looking at a 5-year strategic plan, a 7-year strategic plan, a 10-year plan, and then rolling it back and giving the board something as far as what to look at for their overall goals. On the next slide, I want to talk about value proposition. And the value proposition is sizing this prize. There's 2 interesting little components here, and this is from our internal archives, in that when you look at it, you say, well, Lord Dale, there's a big old swing between you're projecting a 10 to 20% gain, but when you look at percent savings, it goes from roughly 10 to 50. Well, let's look at that one component, the 9.8%, which is the consumer products expansion. It was the largest logistical spend, but it yielded the lowest percent savings. That's important. And the reason that's important is because that organization had a large enough mass that they were already optimizing their transportation routes. On a smaller organization, found some savings, and it was filling the load a little bit better and getting a little bit better spin on a basis. And so there was a much higher percentage savings. So every organization is going to be different. There is no typical organization out there for savings. The goal is to do the best we can with what you're given and to move forward with what your individual results are. For tactical planning is the execution of the strategic plan. Every couple of years, we should be readjusting the tactical plans to make sure they're in line with the strategic plan or a changed or modified strategic plan. It considers timing and schedule for each one of the components of the strategic plan. It is important to look at the capital requirements that are outlaid from the strategic plan and implementation of those. Do we have the money? Can we invest? Is this the right time? The next thing is, do you really have the resources inside, or do you need to outsource some of these events by hiring a consultant? Is it just talking about operational and transportation needs? No, it includes freight negotiation, cost reduction, inventory. Tactical planning is the execution of the strategic plan. For operations and contingency planning, operational is day-to-day. You just have to take that into account, see what you can do to support the operation if there's easy things, and then contingency planning. Contingency planning is not a crisis moment. Crisis, it's not dealing with, I ran out of trucks today, or I ran out of unitainers to fill orders. Those are crisis management during the day or accidents. But what we're talking about here is events, like a supplier going on strike. Do we have a recall? What if the ports are closed for my primary supplier location? What if I can't get what I need to satisfy my customers? What are my inventories as related to that? These are contingency planning events that if you can, you incorporate those into your sensitivity. So when we're defining the project for a network study, what do we want to look at? We want to look at sales. Where are we getting our sales from, and how are we going to change? What's the timeline that we're looking at? Do we have a set date that we need to be done with the presentation and done with the analysis? What are the marketing strategies? Are we going to change up? Are we going to do something different? Are we going to more e-commerce? How are we going to change our production? How are we going to change our IT structure? Do we have the cash that can handle this? Are there events? And this is one that always seems to jump up in every project I've ever participated in. There are sacred cows out there that some people understand and some people don't. And so it's critical in understanding how you can see what that sacred cow is and what its impact is to the whole network analysis. Then we need to look at can you do it inside or outside, and what are the sensitivity metrics that need to be taken into account. And the reason why is when you start building a model, you really kind of need to understand some of those as it relates to incremental fuel costs, the service time, the planning horizon. Service time right now is most critical from everything I'm seeing in all the projects I get to participate in. An additional point in defining our scope is that we're looking from a model to give us the lowest cost and maximize our inventory or minimize it. And it's not going to yield you everything you need to for speed and velocity. You have to do that outside or coupled with different components when you're looking at the models themselves. So you need a fact-based plan to begin with, and then you accept your business environment and your growth strategy to move forward. You need an analytical tool that really fits your needs and not just the best one out on the market. It needs to be customized, and you need to understand that it's the best one to perform your need. When we look at it, we want to understand a big component, and that is, what is your sweet spot? For logistics, we look at a sweet spot being exactly what is the cost and service mix in the blue circle in the center of the page. With each one of these lines, what I'll do is talk to a couple of them, but the key one is the top one, which is going to be maximizing our profit. If you look at maximizing your profit, well, the most DCs and the quickest you can get it to someone with the least cost is where you want to be. Sounds pretty easy, but it's really not. With each one of the lines, you either increase your inventory, you flatten out your gross margin, your logistics spend goes up or down. And so what we want to get into is that sweet spot that we optimize our margin and our service mix. That's where we want to be, and that's how we can get the greatest profit to the bottom line to the whole organization. So here's another slide that I wanted to talk to. We used to look at it from a demand curve, and the traditional demand curve was with the price of an item, as we increase the quantity demanding, the cost goes down. Okay, well, now it's not quite like that in that people have expectations. And each company's demand service curve is different. So this is not really an example. This is an example from a customer, and everybody's has to be plotted independently. And I illustrate before Prime and after Prime. And this is Amazon Prime event where we're really getting to a next day or 2 day event. And if you look at these two curves, what you see is there's a gap between customer expectations as far as where they were and now. And we believe that is driven from effectively the release that Amazon came forward to say, we can get you there everything in 2 days. Well, everybody else said, well, why can't I get it there, get my stuff in 2 days? And they're encouraging the marketplace to get there. Well, it's a whole lot of structure behind the Amazon model, and that's really neat, but you got to figure out your own company's goal as far as getting to your service to your customers and getting some feedback from your customers, because they will tell you where they want to be. What we want to do is we've got to use a tool. You can either use a spreadsheet or a modeling tool or an incorporating module within your ERP system. And so there's different components here. The first two are independent. The one is incorporated into it. But what does it do? We want to do network optimization. And then how do we want to do it? Is it global? Do we have all the maps? Do we have customization that's needed to apply to customs that have specific components? Do we need some customization for processing our when we're producing our products in multiple plants, and which one goes with which order to the different coasts, to the different countries? And what do we want to come into play with? We've used multiple models out there, and we believe that you need to find the one that best fits what your question is. And your question is coming from the executive committee. And so what are the key components within a model? What we're looking at stocking points, transportation, inventory management, customer service, and the IT. Seems familiar. Okay, it is. And within models, what you need to do is understand the data requirements. And within these data requirements, what you will see is that you have sites, and within the sites you need to understand exactly what is the components within the sites. You have to build that within a model. You have to build your products. For your products, rolling your products up on a higher level will be required. If you have 10,000 SKUs in your current mix, you're going to have to roll it up to within 100 or 200. You have to roll it up for the models to work, because there's a finite magnitude that these models can handle. Within inventory policies, you got to understand whether you want to incorporate it or not, and then the rules and the specific rules and costs associated with the inventory and how it's going to be dispersed out. The demand, all models are based upon the demand that the customer yields as far as either pulling back or pulling forward. So you have a big node analysis where you have these lines connecting, and that yields where you're looking at. The sourcing policies relate to how you move products around. It's critical that you understand how to build sourcing policies and the transportation policies. Step functions between these come into play when you look at specific transportation policies, where if you're at like a typical LTL, you're looking at a 250 weight to 500 to 750. You need to incorporate all of that within the models as well, and understand that when you're getting your information together, that's what you're going to have to need to develop it. When you look at it, you say, okay, I've got all this information. That's great, but what am I missing? Okay, well, if you see everything in blue I just talked about, well, what are these other components in red? Well, they're the outside interface influences that you're going to have to include. You got to look at your real estate. Where the model says to build something may be cost prohibitive. So you've got to move that out. Are there grants and incentives out there that make it very attractive to put in a building that effectively pays for it? Are there energy considerations where people have or have not? Currently there's different things occurring with a lack of propane because of coolness. You look at your energy of use out in California and in the Northwest. Those come into play a little bit. You need to be around your trade zones and what are your taxes. If those are not taken into account, you really have the right answer that you're trying to get to. This next slide is I'm going to say a typical project example in which we look at it from, we get our data, collect data, we analyze it, we develop a model, we analyze the alternatives, and we develop a path forward. I'm going to go into talking about some of this in a little bit more detail, and in between here I threw in where you would do a DC assessment to figure out some capacities if you didn't understand your capacities. And this is typical. It's a pretty good example of what we like to go forward with, but it can be changed and modified to any client's needs. So when you look at it, what is the first step? Well, you got to understand what you do. You got to understand what your product offering is, where your sales are at, where all of your new markets are going to be, what are your products, and how are they sourced. You got to understand the systems that you're coming into play. Okay, what is your space, your warehouse, your staffing, and all your inventory? Where is it located? And then your transportation cost. Your transportation costs come into play because the model is just simply math. It's going to use that math to come into the least cost, and so then you got to take that and move it to the next step. So what's the next step? You want to take your current model and you want to look at it and say, we have to associate where we're at and compare it to our baseline. Our baseline is saying that we're moving X number of widgets for Y number of cost. The model needs to be plus or minus 10%, 5%, whatever is an agreed upon number, depending upon the complexity. That is where we would love to be at, because that allows us, once we establish a baseline, we're going to go into an optimized scenario. And then what we have to do is we have to validate that baseline to make sure it's built correctly. How do we validate? We look at our source documents. We look at general ledger, and we look at P&L statements. From there, what we want to do is we want to look at, well, what are the alternatives we want to do? Do we want to look at just simple what our forecasts were doing? Our forecasts yield an outcome based upon the past. But we're really looking for outcome that kind of looks at recent events. And what are the unlikely outcomes that might occur? So these thought patterns are how you want to look at building your alternatives. And your alternatives are going to yield answers and questions that allow you to develop for the future. And once we define our alternatives, we want to start modeling them. So how do we do that? What we want to do is we basically want to take into account everything else after the alternatives. So we want to take into account the cycle and safety stock cost. Because modeling software doesn't guarantee you the right answer. All it does is it gives you a good direction for where the product and product flow is going to occur and how it can be changed. From a transportation perspective, we've got to include that inventory in the safety stock. We've got to include that inventory transfer cost. And then something that is difficult to do is, are we coming up or getting better warehousing and delivery cost because we've come up with a size increase, and so therefore the cost per delivering goods has gone down? Realistically, all of the modeling efforts should follow a similar approach, which is validate the existing model, run the alternatives. After the model alternatives are run, summarize the results, present the results, modify them, eliminate the alternatives that shouldn't, summarize and run again, summarize all the cost and the service factors, perform some sensitivity, and then get the investment costs associated with each alternative. And so what do you do with after the investment cost? Well, the investment cost, you need to take it into account with an economic analysis. And what does that include? That includes all of the extra cost that goes into it, the personal relocation, the stock relocation, if there's computer or IT relocation, the taxes, the equipment. Everything outside of what the model said needs to be taken into account to give you the opportunity to perform some sensitivity that says, if I'm going to go plus 10%, 20%, 40% on my fuel, what's the effect? If I'm going to go minus 10% on my labor, what's the effect? Those things are key. It is key to understand what the effect is because change is inevitable, and that's where we have to be with a flexible model. And the last thing is you want to look at a time-phased implementation because if it's not implementable, then is it really a successful project? Have you finished this project and you take a look at your strategy that says, we can't do this. Well, that makes no sense then. We have to have something that's implementable and something that can be done in a reasonable amount of time. The next thing we want to talk to, and Bob, could you take this, move it forward for me for a second, please? Success is not simple. What we want to look at is why is it not simple? This is a very complex pattern of a lot of activities that need to occur in a short duration. It needs executive level to ground level understanding that we are going down the path of creating a planning horizon of a 5-year strategic plan. It's not going to be something that's done overnight in a simple back of the napkin, easily done, immediately buy-in. This is complicated, and it requires focus. It requires focus from the primary manager to both, if you use outside resources, to the entire implementation team. It can be done quickly, but it needs to have as a result an action-oriented and time-phased implementation plan. You have to get support from the plan, and if you don't get support from the top, it is critical that you have a voice to get to the top throughout the process. The whole goal for a company is figure out what maximizes the profits to the stakeholders. What we want to do is make sure that we're yielding the best dollar for what our work effort is. And last but not least is, did you answer the questions that the senior leadership team requested? And are you prepared to take this project, create a process, and be able to duplicate it on a frequent basis? Now, I've laid this out as far as how we recommend to do a network project, Bob, and I would welcome any questions or feedback to all of the information that we've just gone through.
Thanks, Dale. This was a topic that was of great interest to me, along with editing Supply Chain Management Review. I edit Modern Materials Handling, and we do a cover story each month of a facility. And one of the things I've noticed over the last year or 2 years when I'm interviewing the facility manager is how often they say that the project that they initiated or the facility that we're writing about was the result of a network optimization and design study. And it seems as if, particularly in retail, but in other industries as well, that our industry, distribution industry, logistics industry, is really going through a sort of rationalization right now. That's my opinion, or at least my impression. Are you seeing that as well?
Absolutely. It's just like the value proposition slide. I think 5 of the 9 network types or projects that we had brought out is basically an expansion. And so you're seeing contraction and expansions quickly. And it was not long ago that the execution on these used to be driven out to a longer time frame. The execution on these nowadays are very quick. Senior leadership is ready to move once they feel that they've got a good base project. And that I do find, Bob, that I'm struggling with everybody wanting to position the models to redo it on a more frequent basis. It's still considered a project, not a process.
Huh. Now, last week, I was at a planning session for a logistics conference, and one of the attendees runs a large million square foot distribution center, conventional DC. Her joke was that she maybe has 10 feet of conveyor. She asked a question that wasn't about network design, but I think that there's a similar relevant question. And so her question was, we have this million square foot DC. We run conventional processes. We're expanded to the gills. We don't think we want to open a second DC. How do we know when it's time to automate? And when you were talking, one of the things I wondered is, so maybe I have one DC and I'm thinking about 2, or maybe I have more than one DC and I'm thinking about my overall network. Are there cues, or are there things going on in my operations that, sort of like her question, well, when is it time to automate? Are there things that I should be looking at in my operation that says to me, maybe maybe it's time for a network optimization? What are those cues I should be looking for in my operations?
Well, I like to say as a cue is when you get to within 80% of your fill at your building, you need to start planning for the future. Because at 85% you're full. At 90% you're going downhill. At 95% you're really struggling. And when you peak out, you start effectively buying or leasing 3PL space or third-party space outside of your current complex. You need to start that process. The first step is leverage the ability to use somebody else's space and where your furthest point where you have a great customer concentration. And here's an example. If your customer is located with one building, let's just simply say it's in northeastern Pennsylvania. If you have a decent-sized customer base on the West Coast, why wouldn't you consider bringing it in and pulling it across? In any optimization study I've ever done, if you have one facility, the centroid is going to be somewhere either in the Memphis, St. Louis, or Kansas City area. At 2, you can split the nation and look at your two components of population. When you run out of space, what you can do is you leverage to the point that your transportation cost, and this is an outside space, when your transportation costs exceed the amount it's going to take to run a facility, you know it's time to execute on the facility somewhere else.
That's a great point. And I'd like to remind attendees, submit your questions, and we'll get them to Dale. So here's one. On one of the early slides, and you didn't reference it, but it was on your slide, carbon footprint. So to what extent is, there were, before the recession, we heard a lot about people trying to measure their carbon footprint and looking at their, network from a sustainability standpoint. To what extent is carbon footprint or sustainability driving network optimization today, post the financial crisis?
I think it's called the culture of the organization. I can't say the magnitude, but I think it's the culture of the organization and what they want, because the models themselves have basically been built with the algorithms to allow that to go into play. And what you want to do is you're looking at the fill ratio of a truck, And what that does is that helps you when you're trying to optimize that carbon footprint. It really helps in your transportation costs too, but the carbon footprint algorithms are in most of the models that I've played with. So it's how high you want to rank that in your outcomes is where the independent client needs to go if it's a big driver. And I've seen some that are totally cost-driven, some that are totally service-driven, and some that incorporate that in the carbon footprint. It's quite interesting that a banking study wanted carbon footprint as a high component.
I think we have time here for two more. So here's a question here, Dale. On the slide where you were talking about, the potential savings or the percentage range, and it seemed as if those were related to transportation costs. So as people are looking at network optimization studies, are they typically looking at their transportation costs as the justification for the project?
He was. I think you need to take into account now your transportation spend will get you most of the way, but I don't think it's going to get you the answer when you incorporate service level. And really the market is driven towards service level now. It's driving towards service level and a much quicker service level. So you're getting away from a 48 to a 72-hour turn on a truck, and you're really looking for your order to be there within 24 to 36 hours, especially in parcel, but back into the LTL and truckload realm as well.
So actually, you just answered the last question I was going to ask you, which was, so to what extent is, now that we're all going, particularly in retail, that we're trying to compete with that Amazon Prime slide that you had up there, how much is time to market affecting or driving, the network optimization projects that you're looking at today?
It's huge. It's huge because your competition is sitting here saying, we're going to be able to get you this product in X amount of time. And, we're going to charge you a little bit more, but we're going to get it there. You don't have to place your order until 2 days before, and we're guaranteeing it's going to be there. So I've saved a day in my cash-to-cash. So in my cash-to-cash play, I'm not paying for that merchandise until it's almost here.
Right.
That's a great play. And for you to meet that and meet that service level, you've got to be able to deal with the transportation, the infrastructure to take it if you want to keep your product, if you want to keep your current market share.
Well, Dale, I want to thank you for this presentation. I really learned a lot. I'd like to remind attendees that there was a lot of information there, and there was even more information on the slides, as well as the feature that Dale did for Supply Chain Management Review. If you go to the icon at the bottom of your console, you can download both the presentation today and the feature. And if we didn't get to your question, by all means, please still submit it, and we'll get these to Dale later. For our friends at JDA Software and NetSuite, for Dale, and for Supply Chain Management Review, I'm Bob Treblecock, and I want to thank everyone for attending today.